Friends, I wish I could invite all of you over to my house and we could hang out in my cozy living room together next to the fireplace like I do with my book club friends every month. I host a personal growth book club at my house every month and we read different nonfiction books, faith-based books. And it's so lovely. It's so great to be able to chat with friends and share your takeaways and learn from each other. And so this is about as close as I can get for now. So today I want to share with you of the 46 books that I read in 2021, what were my top 10 favorite ones, and share some of my takeaways with you so that you can decide if you maybe want to read them yourself. I did put a link to the blog post with the list of all 46 of the books, organized by category, in the description below. So check that out. For the first time ever this year, I've been blogging my list of books for many years now, but this year, for the first time ever, I actually wrote out a brief summary and my takeaways for every single one of those 46 books. So go check that out. Also, if you're wondering, like, how do I read so much stuff and implement it? How do I take action on it so that it actually is impactful for my life versus just wasting my time, like blowing through books like crazy? I have a whole video about that. It's called 12 Tips to Implement Personal Growth Books You Read. So I'll put a link to that below, as well as a link to a cheat sheet PDF that I created based on that video with those tips. So let's get into my top 10 books for the year. First one, which was in the category of faith-based books, is called A Gentle Answer. And I feel like in this age we live in of so much seething anger and polarity and people getting offended and everything feeling like it's us against them, I feel like every American Christian should read this book. It is so well written, and it just made me pray, Lord, help me be more like you. Help me be more gentle, more forgiving, more humble, more careful in my anger. Help me be a friend to people who are not like me. Help me grow thicker skin and not take offense. Help me only get angry in the right ways for the right things. He has a great section in there about receiving criticism humbly and graciously that is so brilliant. And like, it just made me think, Lord, help me forgive and love those who hurt me or who I disagree with. And reading that book reminded me that I am both a grimy sinner and a posturing self-righteous Pharisee all at the same time. And I am a soul who needs grace just as much as every single other person on the planet. So again, it was just such a well-written book. And I finished the book being like, I don't even know where he lands from a political standpoint, which is very, very impressive. But again, I think just an incredible book to help you navigate these tense things, whether it's just how you feel about people who are different from you as you see it on the news or on Facebook, as well as people in your real life who you're sitting across the table from at Thanksgiving, or who you live with in your own home or work with, or, you know, the criticism that you're receiving from others, how to handle all of that in a really, really beautiful way. I think if all Christians read this book, we would be a lot healthier and people would be like, oh, there actually is something different about Christians, and they would mean that in a good way. The next one in my top 10 faves, and these are not in any particular order, but the next one is a parenting book called Hunt, Gather, Parent. I grabbed this from the library from the Lucky Day section when I was there with my best friend one day, and I was like, guarantee this book will be terrible, because every time I just grab a book from the library on a whim, I always end up being like, nope, not a good fit. This is a waste of my time. But it sounds crazy and it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but really this book changed the way that I will parent forever. And I have talked about this book so much to that best friend that even though she doesn't read as many like nonfiction personal growth books as I do, she read it recently and she is blown away. She's like, I cannot believe this makes so much sense. She's been implementing this stuff with her 1-year-old and she's like, oh my goodness, this is making such a difference. And granted, like both of us said, it's not like knowing good parenting strategies just removes all of your child's sin and they're just perfect. Like, you are always going to be a sinner. Your kid's always going to be a sinner. So that's always going to be a challenging dynamic in parenting. But I've been really fascinated the last couple of years with the idea of how we in the West and we in modern day life live so differently from how most people live in the world and how most people lived in the history of the world. And what are the implications of that? And what do we think God really intended in terms of how we live, how we parent, how we do community, how we work, how we approach money, how we approach technology, right? And so this author turns what we think in the West is totally normal, healthy, good, admirable parenting, or, the child parent struggles that we think are totally avoidable. She turns all that stuff totally on its head and tells you how various other cultures parent so differently. It's just incredible. It really is. My favorite section of the book was where she shared how family-centric versus child-centric other cultures are, and the really masterful ways that they bring even really young kids into everything they do related to the home, and even their work when possible. And I had already tried to start doing more of this after reading a Waldorf book and a Montessori book in the last few years. But when I read this book, it really inspired me to do that more. I think I read that in early 2021. And then since then, I've actually reread a good chunk of it again. I know that maybe some of what I'm saying here maybe sounds obvious, like, oh, include your child in household tasks, duh. But this book really takes it to a whole new level. And I'm not saying that I necessarily am following every single thing in the book or agree with every single thing. But when you read it, you just will be like, yes, okay, thank you. This makes so much sense. And I think it will take so much guilt and shame off of you for feeling like, I need to entertain my kids. I need to take them to all these fun places so that they're not missing out. We need to go to the zoo and the museum and go on trips to Disney World. And like, it totally shattered that I think what is a very common American notion of like, I need to get my kids entertained. I need to get them in front of a TV or screen or playing with something so that I can get stuff done. Or like, okay, now they're napping or now they're sleeping, so now I go get stuff done. And she's like, like, bring your kids into the stuff that you do. So anyway, really, really good book. Definitely recommend it. I think it will totally change the way you view things. And when I include my 1-year-old and 5-year-old in things, even though it takes way longer and they certainly don't do it perfectly, they just glow. Their behavior is drastically different. They're learning. It's great. Okay, let's keep going. Next book is A World Without Email. I love Cal Newport's content. His book, Deep Work, Digital Minimalism, both are incredible. This newest book definitely didn't disappoint. The title is a little intriguing because you're like, okay, is he saying we should do away with email entirely? And that is not really necessarily the point. But his point is, rather than trying to spend all this time to come up with systems for how you handle email, and okay, I do it at this time and I do it in this order and I use these special filters and all that stuff, all of which can be helpful and all of which I do. He's like, let's back it up a step to begin with and consider how we can reduce the amount of email in the first place. And he doesn't just talk about email, but he talks more in general about email, any kind of instant messaging that you're doing at work, any kind of communication that takes place in a pretty quick back and forth kind of way in order to accomplish something. And I loved, he had so many good ideas in his book, but I just loved the idea of like, okay, before we had email or before we had Slack or instant message, we had to have better systems in place for how work was done. And now we almost rely on those things too much. And how can you create systems in your business or in your workplace, even if you don't own your own business, or in other areas of your life, volunteer work you do, whatever, how can you create things so that the amount of back and forth email that needs to take place is reduced? And he gives some really great ideas on how to do that. But that's definitely something that we're always trying to be mindful of in my business, even though it's small. I have a handful of contractors who work for me and that's it. But rather than being like, okay, this is done, you can go do this thing, having to email about different things, we know, okay, when this person is done with this thing, it goes in this folder. This person knows to check in that. The next person knows I have to check the folder by this day, et cetera, et cetera. And we're trying to reduce the amount of messaging that needs to take place as much as possible. We don't do any instant messaging in my business. really the only way for one of my contractors to get a hold of me in like at a moment's notice is to call me on the phone, which rarely happens. We don't do meetings. Really, it's just a little bit of email here and there. The next book, which I would say is kind of in the category of personal growth, is The Power of Writing It Down. And as I was reading the book, honestly, there were parts of it that I was like, I don't know if this is totally relevant to me or if I'm even quite 100% sure what this book is about. Part of it was kind of trying to make a case that anyone is a writer. Do you want to be a writer? You are a writer. You can be a writer, kind of thing. And that part I didn't need as much, but she makes such a compelling case for writing and how important that is. And she made a good enough case that I have prioritized more reflective writing since then when I read that book many months ago, which is part of why I actually read way less books this year than I have in many other previous years. 46 is actually a small number compared to 2020 and how many I read then. Spending, like she says, like spending even just 20 minutes a day to digest and metabolize your life through writing is incredibly simple, but it's incredibly powerful. And I have been spending a lot more time journaling and untangling thoughts and trying to get thoughts out of my head instead of just continually jamming my brain with more and more content, with more and more thoughts. Some other things I wrote down from the book that I liked are that writing not only helps you see the words you're choosing to describe your life, it helps you to change them. That's something I talk about with my clients. We need to get the thoughts out of your head. It's so powerful and it's so much easier to change the way that you're thinking when you speak those words out loud and you hear it, or when you write it down and you see them. Another takeaway that I loved from the book, she kind of said like, okay, writing for 20 minutes a day seems like a lot. That was what she really advocated for, 20 minutes a day. But she was like, what if writing down your deepest thoughts and your feelings made everything else you do easier? Like, what if it helped you to not overcomplicate something? What if it made saying no to something easier and then you saved all that time that you would have wasted? What if it reduced your stress and your health and your immune system was better? And I thought that is such a good point. It's really an investment of time that hopefully in the long run is actually saving you time from physical suffering, emotional suffering, overcomplicating things, wasting time, etc. So again, a really good book, I think, to encourage you of some of those things. I shared some of the main tips from the book. But if you feel like journaling would be really powerful for you, I would go read it. And I always tell my clients, aside from therapy or coaching, one of the most powerful things you can do to change your life is to do some reflective writing. It's so good. It is amazing how just putting a pen on paper and starting to write untangles things to me that in my head feel impossible to untangle, feel so difficult, so overwhelming. I don't know how to make a decision, and I start writing about it, and God shows up and brings incredible clarity. Another book in my top 10 for this year, kind of in the category of minimalism as well as decor and home, is Minimalistic by Shira Gill. I have always loved her aesthetic, her approach to minimalism and organizing. I've been on her email list for a while. She and Dawn, the Minimal Mom on YouTube, are probably the people that I identify with and aspire to the most when it comes to minimalism. And Shira isn't just a minimalist, but she also happens to be a life coach, which is kind of cool, and an organizer. And I don't think I've ever come across someone who talks about home and organization whose aesthetic fits mine, or I should say fits my aspirational aesthetic better. So like if I could hire anyone to organize my house, it would be Shira. So just looking at her book, even though at this point in my life, I don't necessarily need to read a book about decluttering that tells me like, I know you have too many coffee mugs, get rid of some of them. Because I was like, nope, I don't actually have an excessive coffee mug collection. But just looking at the photos, it's so lovely. I love reading books like that on Sabbath, on our Sabbath Sundays as a family, books that are more photo heavy, that are more about like organizing or decor or something like that, and just appreciating the beauty and giving myself permission to not be there yet, but that's okay. Someday when my kids are grown, I will have tons of free time and make my home beautifully, perfectly organized, and it'll bring me so much joy, right? No, I'm totally kidding. But maybe in heaven, I can aspire to beautiful organizing. Maybe that can be my job in heaven. So yeah, the photos in that book are really lovely. I can almost guarantee your library carries that book. So check it out and you can just enjoy it. And again, it's just so pretty. And I love how she does a very good job of being both a minimalist and being good at organizing. I am definitely better at reducing things and decluttering. I'm not as good at the organizing. Some people are really good at organizing, but they're organizing a lot of stuff. And I feel like she does both very well. And the way that she approaches organizing is very tasteful and beautiful in and of itself. So there you go. Next book, also a home book, although this one is more decor, definitely not about minimalism, but that is Jungalow by Justina Blakeney. Her aesthetic is definitely not mine. It's very colorful. It's a lot of stuff, but I just love looking at her books. I would highly recommend her first book, The New Bohemians. I do really learn a lot about my own preferences from looking at those books. Like I will be looking at a page and a beautiful photo and realize, okay, I seem to have a strong aversion to walls that are painted orange or yellow. Like that just, no, that's a definite no. But I also realized like, okay, even though I'm a minimalist, I'm noticing that to me, there is basically no such thing as too many plants in a room. So it's fun to look at different decor and I feel like kind of put yourself in a different place. She has a very bohemian, eclectic, maximalist, worldly kind of style. And it's just fun. It's so pretty. I would love to have a friend like that where I could go to their house and enjoy it, but then come home to my neutral, more minimal house. Another home book. This is the last home book in the list, but I also really enjoyed Made for a Living by Amber Lewis. Definitely a very different home style. And I would say the homes in this book are wildly beyond the size and budget of my home, which is totally fine. But I think God is, well, I shouldn't say I've arrived, but he's bringing me over time to more and more of a place where I can appreciate the beauty of a home, even if I think I don't think I will ever have that much money. And even if I did, I probably wouldn't have a house like that big or that fancy. There's just something about being able to enjoy beauty. And I really appreciate that, if that isn't obvious so far. So it was a really delightful book to just page through slowly over the course of a few Sabbath afternoons. And I love how approachable and lived in her design feels. And this book reaffirmed for me for like the billionth time that I am way more drawn to homes that have a collected feel, like with items that are vintage and that really have a story, than to homes with items that, theoretically could look identical to the items with a story, but that were purchased brand new from a big box store. Like you could give me two vases that are identical and one of them is brand new from Target and the other one is from a thrift store or it's something that my aunt made or whatever, I will cherish that more one of a kind thing or the thing with a story way, way, way more than even the identical thing from a big box store. And like no one else is going to know necessarily, but to me, filling my home little by little over time with those things that have more of a story or that are one of a kind or vintage is really, really fun and way more meaningful to me. So it's good to just be reminded of that in that book. Obviously, you have to like mix. You're going to have some new stuff, of course. But anyway, next book, a book about minimalism, which is Goodbye Things. This was, I wouldn't say like the best book that I've ever read on minimalism. I don't even know what I would say is my top book on minimalism. Each book has been valuable because I'm at a different place in my minimalism journey, and every book has taught me kind of different things and different perspectives and different ways to approach decluttering. But what I loved about this book was the way that the author finds so much contentment with so little, and the way that he focuses on living in the present. It's not just a book about here's how to declutter your socks and your kitchen utensils. It really goes deeper than that. And it's not a Christian book. That would have made it even better. But I love that idea of And I hope that God continues to grow me in that, of being able to be so content and so delighted, first of all, just in Him, but second of all, in simple things and in less. And when we live in the present and notice what we have, even just like a halfway decent orange from the grocery store can be so delightful. It tastes so good. It smells so good. You know what I mean? But I think we're so busy and we're so focused on the next thing and getting more and better that we fail to appreciate the really simple, really lovely things that God has given us already. So that's something that I'm continuing to practice, I guess you could say, with the Holy Spirit's help. I also really resonated very deeply with his concept of the silent to-do list, which is kind of this idea that like all of the stuff that you own, all of the stuff in your house is silently sent. It's like sending you a silent message. It's basically taking up mental space as tasks. So you might not have all those things on your to-do list, but all the things that you are seeing, whether they're out of place or not, maybe you just haven't used them in a while, maybe it needs to be repaired, charged, anything like that. Those are all extra tasks, essentially. It's like a silent to-do list. And I think that helps explain why, as a very detail-oriented person, I have a very low capacity for clutter, because to me, all of those things are like talking at me. I mean, silently, but they're like all sending me this message like, clean me, use me, maintain me. And it gets overwhelming very fast. So that's a helpful concept to keep in mind as you're decluttering. Like, do I want this thing to have to be talking to me, adding to my to-do list, essentially, or to use a common analogy, like adding additional open tabs in my brain. Book number 9, a parenting-ish kind of faith-based book, I would say, is called Going Public. So our oldest child started school in fall, and we chose to do our neighborhood public school. And I found this book so encouraging. One of the biggest themes of the book was it was so focused on approaching public school and the relationships that you make with people in a really beautiful, collaborative way, not in a combative way. I also read a book in this past year that was more focused on what are your rights in a public school, and still very godly, but I think a little bit more focused on like, okay, here's what you can do, and like stand up for your rights and what you can talk about in school. And that's very helpful to know too. But I just love how this family is so good at relationships and going into, relationship and conversation, whether it's with teachers, classmates, other school parents, with this idea of like, we are representing Christ and we want to be a family that other people appreciate, enjoy, respect. That doesn't just benefit you, but it gives Jesus a good name. And there were so many good parenting thoughts in general on raising strong Christian kids. So I will definitely reread this one. And if you have a child in public school, or maybe that's something that you're praying about, I would highly recommend it. It was a very hard, big decision for our family to make that decision. I think any option that you choose for your kids' school can be a great one. But if you do end up going the public school route and you want to be really intentional about how you show up and shine your light and all that, I definitely recommend Going Public. Last book on my list, I included one that I have reread numerous times now. This book just seems to keep getting better every time I read it. I have read many books on rest, hurry, Sabbath, minimalism, simplicity, all that kind of stuff. And this has got to be my favorite, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. It's so good. His content is so good. I've never read a book of his so far that was not incredible. And the way he writes is it's so easy to read. It's so good. And I don't know. I could go on and on about this book. I should probably do an entire YouTube video just about this book. But it's incredible. And, he talks about like how hurry is incompatible with love. And he talks about what we can learn from Jesus in terms of how we live our life and how we approach things. And the classic line from Dallas Willard about you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our modern day. I hope I'm getting that quote right. But that's kind of the basis of the title for the book, of course. And just so excellent. I know so many people who have been really blessed by this book. And I feel like every time I read it, God just continues to stir me on, areas that I need to continue to grow and surrender. And the thing is that the more that we do, it's hard to do these things. It's hard to say no. It's hard to carve out time for a Sabbath. It's hard to rest or to put your phone down or to not buy so much stuff all the time. That's hard, but it's also so freeing. It's so good. And I encourage you to keep, following the Spirit's nudging and keep taking steps in the right direction, in a healthier direction. And every little step you take, when you push yourself outside of your comfort zone, whether it's like reading less books and listening to less content, which is something I've been doing more and more little by little over the last couple of years. It feels uncomfortable, but it's so good and it's so worth it. And you find this closeness with God and you feel like, oh, I'm becoming like a more healthy, sane, spiritually mature person. So it's worth the effort. Those are my 10 favorites for this year. Based on where I'm at in my life, it doesn't mean that those were the 10 best books that I read. Someone else could have read the same 46 books as me and maybe picked 10 totally different ones. But based on where I'm at, where our family's at, those were the ones that I just really found a lot of enjoyment from, and the ones that seemed to shift things the most for me in the last year. There are a number of other great ones that came out in 2021 that I have finished so far. I've already finished in 2022, or that I'm still working on finishing. So you'll hear more about those in an upcoming video, I guess, or at some point. But Pray Confidently and Consistently by my friend Val Warner. She Works His Way by my friend Michelle Myers and Summer Phoebus. Tiny Habits, so good. Effortless, also really good. Redeeming Your Time. So more on those to come, as well as many other books. And let me know what is on your reading list for this year. Again, I have a link to all the books that I read last year below, and a video about how I actually implement some of this stuff, because we don't want to be people who just gorge on information and knowledge. We want to be people who are actually becoming wiser and more like Jesus with the information we consume. All right, I hope you subscribe so we can hang out together some more, and I will see you soon. Bye.